Hi everyone, I'm Tavashi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
This is session six of the Symposium Day 2, which marks the 20 years of the INTACH Charter. So for this session, we have our chairs with us, Dr. Louise Cooke and Dr. Vishakha Kawathekar. I'm still waiting to see if she has joined in. Yeah, I
I'm
see her.
very much there. Yeah.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Hello. So our chairs, I'll give a brief introduction and then we can start with the presentations. So Dr. Lois Cook is the director of for Conservation Studies in the University of York. She leads the conservation teaching portfolio and is the deputy head of the Department of Archaeology. Welcome, chair. And our second chair is Dr. Vishakha Kawathekar. She's also a professor in the dean in the faculty welfare and heads the Center for Cultural Knowledge Systems at SPA Bhopal. She teaches in Masters in Architecture, Conservation, and has authored the book Legal Frameworks for Built Heritage in India. She has engaged in research on perception, interpretation, and memory of heritage, and has worked as a conservation consultant for Archaeological Survey of India. I welcome you all. So we can begin with the presentation, and we will get 10 minutes per presentation, and we will have a question and answer or discussion round at the end of the session. And we can address all the questions at the end of the session when every presenter has presented. And at the end of the session, we will also try to take a group photograph with our cameras on. So I would request everybody at the end of the session to switch on their camera so that we can take a group photo. So our first presentation is by Shriya Gautam. You can unmute yourself and you can also state the title of your paper and give a brief introduction if you want. Yeah, so it's done.
Hi. Good morning from a very windy Brighton this morning. And good afternoon to all of you who are in India. And I'm hoping it's sunny and it isn't too foggy there, wherever you are. My name is Shriya Gautam, and I'm the founder and director of research at Speaking Archaeologically, which is an archaeological education group. And my presentation is on one of the projects that we did recently. And I'll be talking shortly about that. So should I be sharing my screen or will you be running the presentations for me?
We can do either way. So if you have your
I
presentation
do
with
have
you,
it on my screen indeed.
yes, so you can also, or I can help you with
My
that.
screen, all right?
Yes, it's visible. You can put on slideshow then.
Right, there we go. So hello and welcome to this particular project that we've been doing for a few years at Speaking Archaeologically. And it's my pleasure and absolute honor to be talking about this today. So my temple site that I'm going to talk to you about is an active temple site. And it, as you can see, has many frescoes that are now diminishing. And I'm talking about the conservation conundrum of culturally significant sites, specifically when the site itself is a temple. And I'm just working on one case study here, but we have many such examples that we've recorded in the past and talked about. Now, I did say that I'm the founder and director of research at Speaking Archaeologically. So, Speaking Archaeologically is an archaeological education group that is based in North India, and it focuses on object analysis, documentation of neglected and forgotten, especially vulnerable sites, with the aim at rescue archaeology. It was founded in 2015, and in the 9 years of its existence since then, it has produced and trained young archaeologists, conservators, and art historians who are engaged in similar activities in India as well as across the world. So about this particular project, the presentation today emerged out of a monument documentation project at Speaking Archaeologically that we've been carrying out all over North India, not just North India, but also parts of South and Central India. But this particular one is a North India only project. And frescoes that are invariably a part of late medieval royal complexes in Himachal Pradesh have caught our attention for a while now. They've become a part of our much larger study on Himachali material culture and history. A bit of background about that. Why do we need to document this? Because Himachali history was never traditionally written until the British came along and they started to formalize that. So we have no formal texts, we have nothing, we have very sparse inscriptions, and there's very little that has been documented formally. And there is a need to detangle the history there. So I suppose you could break the purpose of this project into these three main aims, which is to study the development and spread of miniature frescoes of the Pahadi style in hill states of medieval India, to evaluate their present condition with respect to conservation and vulnerability, and also to detangle the history, like I said, of Punjab hill states, or that is what they were formerly called. Now, moving on, the existing historiography on Pahadi miniatures and frescoes is very limited indeed. It was first studied in its own regard as a separate school of art by Anand Kumaraswamy in 1916, and this work was then taken further by W.G. Archer. Subsequently, there was a detailed study by M.S. Randhawa, then by the late Professor B.N. Goswami and Eberhard Fischer and Karl Khandelwala. One of the notable studies about it also comes from the famous author Mulkraj Anand, who did write about the frescoes of Sujanpur Tira, all of which have been lost now due to a subsequent fire in 1996. Now, our project basically started understanding with who the Dogras were, because it is with the Dogra regime that you start getting a lot of these frescoes in Himachal Pradesh. So the initial starting point was understanding who the Dogras were, where did they come from, what areas did they conquer, and then eventually colonize in Himachal Pradesh, the areas that they retained, and then the areas that they lost to the subsequent Gurkha invasion that also happens right before the British rule starts in Himachal Pradesh. So I'm talking at the cusp of the 18th and 19th century here. So the area that you see in gray in the map, in really light gray, is the Dogra area that was conquered and retained until the very end. The middle darker gray area is the transitional belt, which retained some features of the Gurkha regime later on, and also incorporated the culture of the Gurkhas. And the whiter region was completely taken by the Gurkha invasion. That is at least the situation of Himachal Pradesh when the British come to Himachal and colonize it or conquer it, or rather take its reins from the Gurkhas. So we have the lighter gray area that remains predominantly Dogra even today, the transitional area, which has mixed cultural components even today, and the whiter areas that has a completely different culture. Now, after looking into that, and after we sort of figured that out, we started studying the Himachali material culture. We started studying the Dogri language and its variants and the script and its variants. We started also to look at how the art could be studied from these areas and how could that be juxtaposed. We started looking into customs and traditions, and we started looking at the historical archives, whatever little or whatever lot they could provide us. And all that invariably told us these four main points, which is A, early medieval Himachal was predominantly pre-Dogra. There were no Dogras there. There's several instances of art and archaeology and epigraphy that shows that the area was ruled by the Rajputs, notably the famous letters in Chamba and the Bhuri Singh Museum. Somewhere around the late 12th, early 13th century, the region gets conquered by Dogra rulers who bring their distinctive architecture and material culture into play. The Dogra dominant polity is displaced by the Sikhs and then eventually the Gurkha invasion around 1804. And the area is finally annexed by the British Empire in 1813. The material culture that we see in Himachal Pradesh is an amalgamation of all these influences and all these variants that came along with so many people. So, what about the frescoes essentially? At the height of Dogra supremacy, another political event that comes into light is the Mughal connections of Himachal Pradesh. Akbar and later his son Jahangir are the ones who succeed in turning several Dogra rulers as their feudatories and subjugates, and resultantly, the influence of Mughal court becomes very apparent in the Dogra court as well. Now, here are a few material culture examples of this. On my left and the screen's left, you have the Mughal variant of something, and then on the right, you have the Pahadi variant. And you can see how similar they are, even though the ornamentation differs a little bit. Again, we have that in jewelry as well. There's Mughal jewelry on one side and Pahadi jewelry on the other. And finally, the frescoes that I've been talking about. So this is the one titled Mughal is Bazar-e-Masaqqaf in the Red Fort at Delhi. And the Pahadi miniatures, of course, come from the area of my case study, which is Nahan. Now, if I look at the frescoes closely, I see differences and similarities. In terms of similarities, the motifs are very similar, especially initially. There's a lot of focus on floral motifs. There's a similar technique of make. The artists borrow from the Mughal court, and the human figures initially are stylistically similar to the Mughal miniature style. However, with time, there is a difference in palette colors within the Himachali frescoes. There is also the use of powdered horn of cow or mother of pearl for polishing instead of egg white, which was used in the Mughal frescoes. And this recipe is derived from the Brihat Samhita, which is a 6th century text. Eventually, there's a development of secular and religious motifs within the Himachali frescoes. And then there is also the profuse use of metallic dyes, which we particularly associate with Himachali culture in terms of the miniature art. Now, the present study area looks like this. And as you can see, in a very busy city of Nahan, here is the site area, the Shiv temple at Nahan, which I think is a misnomer because there are no frescoes regarding Shiva here at all. This is what the temple looks like on the outside, and nobody, absolutely nobody, could figure out that this is a site of a historical or cultural importance. It just looks like a modern day temple. And when you start looking at the frescoes, these are the 4 main kind of frescoes that we were able to identify and classify from the temple. Type 1 is the Vaishnavite ones. Type 2 is the Shakta frescoes, which is they relate to Devi Mahatamya from the Markandeya Puran. Type 3 is the Krishna Leela frescoes from Geet Govinda. And type 4, of course, which is the most profuse type of frescoes that we have from the site, are the floral motifs. And these are almost everywhere, every side of the temple. When we looked at it under a handheld electronic microscope, these are the problems that we observed on the fresco surfaces. There's the soot deposit on the northern wall, especially. There are oil smears, which results from a cultural practice of smearing any kind of votive offering onto the deity's face. This is something that you encounter quite a lot, unfortunately, in a lot of temples, including some really old temples where you have some really important reliefs as well. Anything that's votive gets smeared onto the deity. This includes turmeric, this includes vermilion, this also includes oil that is being offered to the deity. And it is quite literally smeared on the surface, and you find oil smears as well. You also see cracks related to delamination of frescoes on painted surfaces. And there is also an exfoliation and exposure of the underlying bhiti wall because of whatever's been going on.
You
Now,
have 2 minutes left.
I am coming to the conclusion, don't you worry about it. So we went on to do a condition assessment, and here we can see things like delamination happening. We can also see deliberate defacing and vandalism, especially graffiti. We can see exposure to natural elements such as water leaching and that pigment leaching with it, and consequently the black mold formation. There's exposure to light causing fading of pigment. There is also the soot and carbon residue, specifically within the frescoes inside the sanctum sanctorum. Now, significance of palatial frescoes. Why should they be studied at all? Why should they be documented at all? When you look at these paintings, you sort of see that there is a variation that eventually evolves from one part of Himachal Pradesh to the other, which means 2 frescoes from the same state essentially cannot be treated as parallels. So you essentially have to divide them in terms of the area that they're coming from and who was the ruler back then, because it was not ruled by one person. There were smaller principalities and each had their own style. When you start looking at the material culture and when you start studying these patterns, you find that the scientific work done on this art is limited to only miniature paintings on paper. The frescoes are never really taken into interplay. The recipes are not studied, the material and their technique of make, how it varies from one place to the other is not really recorded. And since the historiography of the area is already limited, since there's very little known about it already, this becomes even more important to study. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. I would like to thank everybody at INTACH for giving me this opportunity to speak about my project. I'm very, very indebted to late Professor B.N. Goswami, who's been instrumental and a constant guiding light until the very end in this project. And above all, I would like to thank my uncle, Mr. Naveen Sharma, who enabled me to study the frescoes in Nahan particularly, a very difficult site to reach because, as I said, it cannot be located or it cannot be seen outside. Thank you very much for your time. This is a selected bibliography. If you want to read more, my paper will be with you and on academia.edu at the end of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shriya. Our second presenter is Riddhi Shah. So you could give your paper title and a brief introduction if you want.
Is it feasible to give a quick comment by the chair? Because getting to the end, then maybe may I ask my other chair, what is your view on this? Like,
I think I would questions at the end. They're only short papers, aren't they? So so if we,
Yeah. I think it's better that we keep the discussions and the comments at the end of each, like at the end of all the presentations, so it'll be easier to discuss and answer for the presenters as well. Is that okay, Professor
but,
Vishakha?
but maybe
Yeah.
maybe at the end we could go through in start with the 4 page papers and then
Yes.
open into more broad
Yes,
questions.
ma'am.
Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yes.
oh,
That's
no
how
problem.
we've been proceeding. So yeah, Riddhi, you could start.
Yeah, okay. I'll just share my screen and then start.
Yes.
So please let me know if it is visible. Is it visible?
Yes,
And
it's
am I
visible.
audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Riddhi Shah. I'm an architect and I teach in Architecture College as well as I'm associated with INTACH as convener of Rajkot chapter. And we do a lot of initiatives which helps in identifying and preserving architectural as well as other heritage of the region. So my paper for today's presentation is preserving the past, challenges and strategies of sustaining historical integrity. So basically my investigation started with this term, places historical integrity. So places are not just physical locations, they embody the lived experiences, values and shared narratives of people who inhabit them. This paper explores the concept of historic integrity in heritage conservation, emphasizing the needs to protect both the physical and intangible heritage of intangible aspects of cultural heritage. Drawing on key international charters, international as well as national charters, Venice, Bura, Nara, and INTACH Charter, historic integrity is framed as a preservation of site's material fabric as well as its cultural, historical, and symbolic significance. So while we look at the idea of historic integrity theoretically, there are significant challenges that comes while we look at the practice. So significant challenges in the case of India have been identified where rapid urbanization, insufficient resources, policy gaps, and environmental threats jeopardize the protection of heritage sites. These challenges are exemplified through the case of Rajkot district, where a range of heritage assets ranging from archaeological sites to colonial era infrastructure are at risk due to development pressures. Urban expansion and inadequate or adequate funding have led to the degradation of these sites, diminishing their authenticity. So while I look at the theoretical aspect, it generally talks about inadequate funding and urban expansion. But in while we look at practically or in the case of Rajkot district's situation, many a times it is adequate funding. There is adequate funding, but the method of actually using this fund is not in line. So I'm looking at both the cases. And to address these issues, practically the strategies suggested to preserve historic integrity are integrating heritage conservation into urban planning, promoting sustainable tourism, encouraging adaptive reuse of historic structures. The key focus of which could be community involvement in the preservation process. Now, another point of question is who this community is. Generally, community is looked at as the group of individuals who use this space, or a specific religious group, or a group of individuals who are of single occupation, who follow single occupation. But here I say that in the case of cities, in the case of tier 2 cities in India, the community is not just the individuals who use it, but it is also a group of individuals who are bureaucrats, who govern the way in which development happens. So it's all about bringing about these nuances while we look at the practical conservation or adaptive reuse aspects and going ahead. So ideally, a bottom-up approach is advocated where local communities actively engage in identification, protection, and restoration of heritage sites. And this process, this approach empowers communities to safeguard their heritage and ensure the continuity of cultural identity for future generations. But when we compare the practical and the ideal, or when we start working on ground, the real question starts here as to how can a bottom-up approach be effectively tailored to India's diverse cultural, social, and economic context to ensure the inclusive and sustainable preservation of historic integrity. So basically this idea or this inquiry starts from the mention of the term historic integrity in all the charters, including INTACH Charter. And when it is mentioned that historic integrity should be continued, or the conservation preservation should happen as historic integrity was there and it should be continued. But while we look at the ground situation, what are the real problems when we start working on bringing historic integrity, and how can a charter be tailored to bring in this effectiveness? Efficiency and effectiveness of a charter is the question probably. So I'll just briefly, so with this question of how can a bottom-up approach be effectively tailored to India's diverse cultural, social, and economic context to ensure the inclusive and sustainable preservation of historic integrity, I will bring forward, or I'm bringing forward, the case of Rajkot, which is located in the western region of India, basically part of Gujarat. So Saurashtra is, if we look at the map of Saurashtra, it is a physiographic region in Gujarat which has a sea coast, and the central region is mountain ranges. So while we look at the broad division, cultural divisions, it was divided into Halar, Jhalawad, Gohilwad, and Sorat, and Rajkot is in the center. Its locational importance and physiography is crucial that it became the center of this region, which is actually a part of Gujarat but is separated culturally. So in this case, this is a aerial photograph of a tower, which was the gate at some point in time to the city. So now when we look at this, we start zooming down from the bigger idea of what is heritage integrity, what is historic integrity, and how to bring forward this idea of or how to practice historic integrity or continue historic integrity in the case of tier 2 city. when we do a ground survey. So currently, now I'll show you the pictures which actually show the ground condition. And I am sure that India has so many cities very similar to this city. But my question is that while these cities are getting urbanized, while these cities are changing, what is it that we must continue, or what are the aspects, or how can we stop it getting degraded with the funding that we have? So urbanization is the key issue, and how to see to it at this juncture that there are certain policies which help us protect this heritage. So there are these images are in bits and parts, but it actually shows the ground condition, wherein there is this 1880 building which houses a library, the first library, 135 years old library. There's a community center, there is a museum, and is surrounded by these newer buildings. So what happens is that idea of a historic building located at such a great location in the city is getting diminished slowly and steadily. And probably the shop owners here, they do not know what is happening inside. Neither the people are interested. It's just put in the travel the diaries of certain people, or it is there in the tourism map that if you come to Rajkot, or if you come to this kind of city, you must visit these places, these places, and probably the visitors come. But the real challenge is how to bring a sense of belongingness. And if that sense of belongingness is there, how do we continue to sustain it? Are there
Last
certain
2 minutes remaining.
yeah. So, and these are the conditions of the buildings which are just near the road. This is a cloth market, which is the first idea of a market in the city of Rajkot. And today's condition of this market is that it is a storehouse for so many shops which are in the urban area. This is a vegetable market, brilliantly thought of a vegetable market which sits in the city. And today there are no vendors who wish to sit inside, and the bureaucrats or the people who are custodians of this place think that it must be erased and something new must come. This is a bandstand where ideally there were certain, it was the first urban recreational space in the city, which was conceptualized by the British but is in a bad state right now. This is the museum, first ever museum. And there are hundreds of buildings which range from archaeological and religious sites, royal and princely heritage. There is a lot of Gandhian legacy in this region. There are infrastructural heritage. There are so many bridges, 150 years, 200-year-old bridges, which are in a situation where newer bridges are coming up and they are abandoned. And there is huge ecological and cultural landscape. So while top-down policies are important at national level, bottom-up approach offers a way to ensure that heritage conservation in India is both inclusive and reflective of its cultural diversity. And engaging communities not only safeguards their cultural identity, but also strengthens the socio-economic fabric of heritage. The question remains, how can this approach be institutionalized across India's varied cultural and complex context? So my paper brings a case of Rajkot, which is very similar to all the tier 2 cities of the country, and tries to identify a way to institutionalize this bottom-up approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Riddhi. We'll proceed with the third presentation. Stuti Gandhi, if you're present, you could unmute yourself. Yeah. Kindly state your paper title and give a brief introduction if you want. Are you able to share your screen?
I should be able to, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stuti, and I'm currently a researcher at the Center for Art and Archaeology at the American Institute of Indian Studies in Gurgaon. And it's a photo archive where we document heritage sites and museums in India. My paper today is titled Reimagining Heritage, Decolonizing Indian Museums for Inclusive, Authentic, and Sustainable Conservation. So the scope of the museum in India is gradually expanding, encompassing a diverse range of activities that go beyond traditional exhibitions. People now visit museums not only to look at artifacts, but also to engage with them, learn from them, and accept them as a reflection of their history and culture. During the colonial era, objects were stripped of their context and the voices of the associated communities were marginalized. But colonization is not just about physical control, it also imposes a single narrative, pushing aside other perspectives. So, decolonization is about reclaiming multiplicity, resisting hegemonic frameworks, and fostering inclusive practices that honor the diversity. In 2023, the Prime Minister unveiled plans for the Yuge Yugin Bharat National Museum, which is said to be the world's largest museum housed in the north and south blocks near Rashtrapati Bhavan. With 950 rooms, the museum will trace 5,000 years of Indian history, celebrating cultural heritage and struggles for independence. These are some screenshots from the virtual walkthrough of the new Yuge Yugin Bharat National Museum that's been uploaded on the Prime Minister's YouTube channel. As the new museum project develops, transparency and scientific methods are essential to address concerns about rewriting history and to ensure it represents India's diversity. The concept of civilization has evolved from focusing only on material progress, like cities and technology, to emphasizing sustainability, social justice, and cultural exchange. Civilization is now seen as a collective, ongoing effort shaped by different perspectives and aspirations and is not a fixed goal. India's efforts to bring back its cultural heritage have been gaining pace in the last few years, with more and more sculptures and artifacts being returned. By 2024, over 400 artifacts have been brought back to India. While these achievements are important, they also raise concerns about what happens to these sculptures once they're returned, and the lack of transparency in how they are being retrieved and reintegrated. Without proper management and accountability, the process of repatriation could unintentionally continue colonial practices in a different form. Now, these are two examples of sculptures from the National Museum in Delhi that were repatriated. One of them, the sitting Buddha, mentions that it was repatriated, but the Yogini sculpture does not mention that anywhere else, anywhere around it on the label. The Indian Cultural Portal, which is a central digital platform by the Ministry of Culture, provides some information about the returned artifacts, but the database is far from complete. Now, this portal lists many of the repatriated objects and has informative stories about their histories. But what I noticed was that the present location category has been left blank for most of these artifacts. Now, similarly, Readdress Return of Treasures, an exhibition project by the Archaeological Survey of India and the National Museum Institute under the Ministry of Culture, lists repatriated objects and their origins, but does not provide information about the fate of many sculptures after the return. Again, information on the current storage or how they are going to be displayed is missing. This lack of transparency makes it hard for the public to know how these artifacts are being assimilated into the cultural landscape. If repatriated objects remain in storage or are only available to a select few, then the process of reclaiming cultural heritage becomes more of a symbol than an actual change. This is similar to the colonial times when decisions about cultural objects were made without involving the original creators or custodians. To make repatriation process truly meaningful, there should be more transparency. The government's online portal should indicate detailed histories and plans for displaying or restoring the returned artifacts. And this would allow the public and scholars to engage with them more meaningfully. Investing in infrastructure for regional museums could help display repatriated objects and make them more accessible. Celebrities and billionaires are also increasingly buying cultural artifacts, navigating the balance between private ownership and the responsibility to preserve cultural heritage. For example, Stanley Ho, a Hong Kong billionaire, played a major role in buying some of the zodiac animal head sculptures that were looted from China's Summer Palace and donating them to Chinese museums. His actions brought these pieces back home and also show the role that private wealth in returning cultural property taken during colonial times. Some private collectors, like the Indian billionaire Nita Ambani, have acquired historical items such as the Shahjahan's turban ornament or kalgi and a historic diamond ring, probably from the Golconda region, as part of efforts to reclaim India's cultural legacy. However, private ownership may not always result in public display, raising questions about accessibility and whether private collectors can truly contribute to cultural justice. Governments can encourage private collectors to share their artifacts through incentives like tax benefits, loans, or research scholarships. For example, collectors could receive tax relief for lending artifacts to museums or funding research related to their collections. These measures could foster collaboration between private collectors and public institutions, making cultural heritage more accessible for research and preservation. How museums present art and artifacts affects how we see and understand them. For example, in the National Museum of Delhi, a stone sculpture of Narasimha is shown in the sculpture gallery, highlighting its classical art features. However, a different Narasimha made by the Kondh tribe of Odisha in Dhokra metal art is placed in the anthropology gallery, making it seem more like an ethnographic object. Abstract representations of Narasimha are often left out of the museum, showing a selective way of curating. In this example, on the third example, is also a representation of the god Narasimha, called Galbapji or Galdev, a deity which is worshipped by the Bhil tribes. And although there is no idol of Galbapji, a special wooden platform represents this deity. Placing tribal art in anthropology galleries can keep old colonial ideas alive by treating it as a simple artifact instead of a living art form. Colonial views often saw tribal art as less important than classical art. Labeling it as anthropological makes it seem less valuable. These galleries often ignore the voices of the communities that make the art. To challenge this, museums should show tribal art alongside other types of classical art. Working with local communities can help present more genuine representations. And the Madhya Pradesh Tribal Museum in Bhopal, from which this Galbapji is a great case study of this. Instead of just showing objects in a dry academic way, this museum employs life-size interactive installations to immerse visitors in tribal worldviews and practices. And this is another example. The Pashupati seal from the National Museum is quite a celebrated artifact, and it has striking similarity with Baba Dev of the Gond tribe, and both are anthropomorphic figures linked with animals and considered protectors of nature. I understand there are multiple scenarios and stories, but permanent displays in museums cannot change frequently, and here technology can play an important role in keeping the dialogue active. Ministry of Culture has collaborated with premium tech institutes in India, the IITs, and the results have been very rewarding. The National Museum has a virtual experiential museum on Ajanta Caves gallery that uses digital technology to present the artwork interactively. It has a walkthrough of the 30+ caves, line drawings, conjectural drawings of the Jatak tales on the caves, and many experiential activities. I think a similar experience can be built to contextualize and present multiple perspectives of different objects at the museum, once the willingness to move beyond traditional chronological narratives or a dominant cultural perspective is imbibed by the leaders and the change makers. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuti. Yeah.
And you
have something to say?
No, I was just
Alright.
stopping the screen.
So we proceed with the fourth presentation by Sivapriya. Can you hear?
Hi, just a minute. I'll just start sharing my screen.
Yes, yes. Kindly state your paper title and give a brief introduction if you want, once you're ready. Do you need some help?
No. 1 second, 1 second.
All right, all right.
Hi, is it visible?
Yes, you could just put it on slideshow and enlarge your window. I think it's
Yeah.
minimized right.
I'm sorry. Is this okay? But I'm not able to do it.
I think it's
At the bottom of your window, on where the slide 1 of 7 says, you could put that on from there. Like slideshow can be started from that bar. The slide 1 of 7, that bar you see at the bottom.
Yeah.
So if you just scroll to the right side of that text, there's a icon which says slideshow. Have you been able to locate it?
1 second, 1 second. I'm not able to do it.
I think either you show the presentation or allow her to just show the slides that she can manage.
Yeah, if you have already sent us your invitation, I could also share my screen if you want.
No, I haven't shared the presentation, but
Shivpriya, may I assist you? Can you
yeah,
just open the screen again to share the presentation?
yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah. Very good. I can only see you, not the screen, though.
1 second, 1 second.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you're looking at towards your screen, go to the extreme right corner. Can you see that some symbol there which shows you go on the एकदम bottom पे, एकदम last line, last.
Beside the zoom bar, like how you zoom into a.
Yeah.
Okay. Now go to the right side. I keep on saying go to the right side, go to the bottom line. Okay. Go to the bottom line. Can you see the minus and plus bar
Yeah, I mean,
just before
Yes,
that? It's very
yes,
good.
this one?
Yes,
yes.
yes, that's it.
Yeah, okay. I'm
Very
sorry,
good.
guys. I'm not able to do it
It's
in the
okay.
first try.
It's all
It's
right.
okay. Let's start.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sivapriya, a third-year student pursuing economics in the University of Delhi. And this paper focuses on understanding people's behavior towards excavations in Kodumanal. And we'll go through it right now. So the area of study is Kodumanal. In Tamil, Kodumanal means Kodumanam, which translates to good, ancient, or early smell. And so we'll talk about Kodumanal right now. It is located in the northern banks of Noyal River in Erode district. The primary source of livelihood is agriculture, and it has an approximate population of 1,000 at present. It is an Iron Age habitation cum burial site that hasn't been largely studied. Excavations and research conducted in this area have yielded numerous findings that reveal aspects of socio-economic structure, artisanal production, and cultural interactions during the Iron Age to early historic transition. The excavations in Kodumanal started initially in 1961 and lasted around 6 seasons. And if you can see, these are some of the findings from the excavations, which includes cane circles, urn burial, swords, daggers, arrowheads, etc. These findings were excavated by digging 49 trenches spanning around 2 hectares, which also included agricultural land. And now we'll talk about the social behavior and community dynamics. So the purpose of the study was to understand how people react towards excavations, and the questionnaire revealed mixed reactions of people. One of the most important questions asked was what they thought about excavations, which provided significant inference. And also while interviewing, it was noticed that it is very hard to get people to talk about historically significant things that have taken place there. So now, and the interviews also like took place directly and through phone calls. And we'll talk about key findings right now. The first one is reluctance to disclose information. The study revealed that less than 10% of the population expressed willingness to report archaeological findings. Historical grievances such as fear of land acquisition and inadequate compensation have created a sense of skepticism about government intentions. And also, residents perceive a risk of losing agricultural livelihoods if excavations expand into privately owned land. Many see artifacts as personal or family treasures rather than objects of public interest if they find them. And also, a local belief also persists that keeping discovered artifacts secret avoids potential disputes or complications, because Kodumanal is basically agricultural land, and like talking about excavations would lead to occupying private land. And the second one is cultural and economic influence. Since the economy depends heavily on agriculture, this conflicts with the land use demands of archaeological projects. Even though only 2 hectares were used for excavations, residents also fear like potential expansion. The tourism potential of excavations have also not been fully realized in Kodumanal. It is a very small town, but then still it had major findings which are very important for like Tamil cultural and heritage. While excavations might draw visitors, they don't provide immediate or significant economic gains to the community. Many residents are unaware of protective measures like the right to fair compensation and transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act of 2013, which ensures fair compensation and resettlement for landowners. This lack of knowledge increases hesitation towards disclosing findings or cooperating with the excavation teams. And also, residents often fail to see how artifacts which appear unrelated to their current socio-economic realities contribute to long-term community welfare. The third and the most important one was generational differences in perspectives. The study reveals stark generational contrasts in attitude towards archaeological excavations. Older residents aging from around like maybe above 50 to 65 exhibit a strong sense of pride in their heritage, because they were present during the initial excavations in 1960s and witnessed the unearthing of artifacts. This proximity to historical events deepened their engagement and curiosity. Middle-aged individuals from around like 30 to 45 often have neutral or moderate views. While they recognize the cultural importance of excavations, they are majorly focused on practical concerns like economic stability. And they also feel that while the discoveries are historically significant, they offer little practical value to their lives. The younger population aging from 18 to 25 shows minimal interest in excavations. Most young individuals were not directly exposed to the initial excavations and lack a strong personal connection to the site. Many rely on second-hand stories from elders and and family members, and often see it as a background retail rather than a core part of their lives. And now we'll move on to the challenges from the observation. The first one is distrust towards government policies. Inconsistent follow-through on government promises in the past has fostered a deep-seated mistrust. This historical neglect amplifies community skepticism towards new initiatives. Policies often lack mechanisms for including community voices in decision making. The absence of effective communication by authorities has left residents in the dark about their rights and protection. Even when residents know about the compensation policies, there is a pervasive belief that these promises will not be fulfilled. Next one would be the lack of awareness. Residents do not receive clear information on how policies can benefit them if their land is used for excavation. There is a prevalent belief that excavations only disrupt livelihoods without offering tangible benefits. The potential for tourism or local economic growth through heritage promotion is not widely understood or communicated. Fewer efforts have been made to rectify that. And the next would be subdued interest in archaeological excavation. This highlights a nuanced and multifaceted relationship between the community and heritage. While there is an acknowledgement of the historical significance, active engagement and enthusiasm remain minimal. The absence of immediate benefit diminishes residents' motivation to engage with or support excavation activities. And one important thing to note is that there is an absence of dedicated space in Kodumanal to display artifacts and educate the community. Next, we will move on to the concluding remarks. Examining social behavior in a small town settlement proved to be exhilarating and interesting. The questionnaire helped unfold the layers that dominate rural behavior, and the varying responses from people provided great food for thought. Complex topics like these have revealed that people are mostly interested in conserving the heritage of their place, but not all of them. The most pressing issue seems to be with disclosing the possible future findings, as they will play an important role in taking history further. A lot of hesitation was observed among people, with only a handful of exceptions. This calls for amicable interaction of the government while interacting with people and discussing excavations. Also, policy changes regarding land acquisition should be considered, as it seems to be the main reason behind the observed hesitation among people. Efforts to increase tourist attraction and community participation will go a long way in changing the behavior towards excavations. Preserving the culture and heritage is the only thing we can leave behind as proof of living. A lot of interest is not given to studying the social behavior, even though they are one of the most important aspects of finding new artifacts. So we need to increase the possibility of people voluntarily revealing them and being interested in preservation. In finality, the point is we have to remember to appreciate the beauty of the past. Remember to leave stories behind for future generations to uncover. And that is the only way we can culturally preserve sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Sivapriya. We'll move to the last presentation of the session by S. Sundar, S. Mahalakshmi, and S. Stella. I'm not sure which of you would be presenting, but you can switch on your video and share your screen if you have the presentation.
I'm Stella Mary, will be presenting the presentation.
Okay, all right.
Can you hear?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
yes.
Yeah, I'm architect Stella Mary. I'm the academician and a research scholar. I have my co-authors with me, architect Sundar and architect Mahalakshmi. The paper that we are presenting today is the architectural sagacity that is to be revisited, interrogating the conservation and the contemporary relevance of Muttram in Tamil Nadu vernacular architecture. So that's our paper title. Is it moving? Yeah. The aim of the paper is to analyze the Muttram as a socio-cultural and the environmental heart, which emphasizes its historical and the contemporary relevance. See, the objectives that we took for the paper reading is like to study the Muttram's diverse roles in Tamil Nadu vernacular architecture across different typologies, especially on the Weavers House in Tirupur, Agraharam houses in Srirangam, and Chettinadu mansions in Karakuടി. So the other idea is to investigate its functional contributions and to access its adaptability to the modern architectural needs. So that was the idea. The methodology that we followed were the comparative literature study analysis of the Muttram across these three architectural typologies and the multidisciplinary exploration of involving the architectural theory as Muttram as a space. On results and the findings that we came across was the integrates of functionality and the culture and the environment around the Muttram as a workspace, a spiritual and a social hub, and also as a ceremonial space. The modern Muttrams, which are often incorporated as the visual elements rather than serving the functional and the traditional roles. On demonstrating on the potential for the adaptation into modern forms like urban atriums and vertical courtyards. So these were the findings and which can be taken up Muttram as the one of these space. Moving on from history, we know the Muttram is named in different types. Like in Harappan era, it is the enclosed courtyards ensuring the ventilation, light, and privacy. Whereas in Sangam era, the courtyards are the spaces where the rituals, storytelling, and community gatherings were done. During the medieval period, the Muttram as a spiritual and the functional space in the Agraharam houses. And in the 19th century, we take it as the Chettinadu mansions where the multiple courtyards for the cultural events were done. Moving on to the Weaver's house, the typologies. The Weaver house, we took Tirupur, the Vadamancheri house at Tirupur, where the Muttram functions as a workspace which integrates the domestic and the occupational life. These families utilize the Muttram for the loom setups, yarn drying, and weaving, creating a collaborative environment for their craft and the hub for the creativity and productivity. Whereas the materials, we also took care on the materials that was followed for these three typologies, where we found the mud, clay, and the lime plaster were prioritized because of the cost efficiency and the functionality of the Muttrams that is there in the weaver's house. While passing on to the vernacular houses, actually what happened, we took the daily activities,
Hi, Stella.
food
There
preparation
is
like
some
drying
connection.
grains and the Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, the voice
Is
has
it
some
okay?
disturbance. Better. It's
Better?
better, yes. A bit better.
Can I know where I stopped? Where it got interrupted?
You had started with the daily activities, so you may continue.
Yeah, of the vernacular houses. Yeah. So the food preparations, especially on the drying of the grains and the utensils, the bathing and the washing activities, and the kolam as one of the artistry functions that happened in the Muttram houses of the vernacular houses. Then moving on to the Agraharam houses, it had a different functional scenario where it serves as the sacred and the practical hub for the religious practice for the spiritual ethos of the household. Here, the materials that they followed were the brick and the lime mortar, which ensuring the durability and the spiritual simplicity. Moving on to the Agraharam daily activities, it is basically of the puja and the rituals they do, especially the Tulsi altar at the center of the Muttram, where the Sandhyavadanam takes place. And also the festival celebrations of the Muttram has transformed the places into a vibrant space. And there is that the Muttram is also acts as the place where the
Stella,
and imparting cultural values to the younger generations.
Stella,
Kind of a curriculum.
there is a certain lag which is coming. If you can switch off your video, I think maybe you switch off your video and it will help us to listen more properly.
Can I stop my presentation and get back again? Or just...
No, you continue. It's just you switch off your
Is it
video.
okay right now?
Yeah, that. Yes,
Switched.
please continue.
Yeah. Ma'am, am I audible right now? Yeah. Okay. So the agrarian houses, the Muttrams are imparting the cultural values for the younger generations, which is their major part of the occupation and the activity that happened in the agrarian spaces. Moving on to the, is it moving? The slide moving? Moving on to the Chettinad houses, which is the other typology, which is known for its grandeur. Which is taken for their grandeur, huge feature of the large nutrients, which acts as multi-purpose space, where the heart and the home of the people who are living over the cultural richness of a particular community. So the materials that we observed here were the granite teak Athamudi tiles, which symbolize wealth and the grandeur of their position in this society. The Chettinad house activities is different from the vernacular activities where they use the spaces mostly for the weddings and the festivals, the grand ceremony and celebrations, and the community bonding, especially on the storytelling sessions, the folk art performances. It also plays the other role, the activity, the time of and preparing for feasts and rituals happens. The Muttram houses, like the carvings and the imported tiles that is used there, stands for their similar prosperity. The gathering of the people and their emotional exchanges in the interactive spaces at the center of the Muttram gives the idea of their integrity with the relationships that they have. We also looked into the socio-cultural dimensions of how these Muttram work. So where we found, slide changed? Yeah. Could someone help me? Is the slide changed?
Yes.
Yeah. The space for informal learning, the Muttram had the dynamics. Muttram had the family dynamics, the ritual practices, artistic expression, and the educational activities that is happening at the center part of the house. So the spaces for informal learning and the cultural transmission, the canvas of the creativity and cultural performances, hosting festivals, spiritual activities, facilitates the bonding of the connection and the central hub for cultural activities. Here, I just want to point out the family dynamic. Though or and discussing at the center of the more gives the value than being taking their relations in the space is highly appreciated, or the emotional connect which happened in the Muttram places. The point we noticed there's a current change of generations, emotional and the family connectivity in the family. On moving on to the timeline, we noticed the timeline activities of the Muttram. This is from the ages, it is like that. We continue to do it as like morning, mid-morning, afternoon, evening, and night. So this was the activities timeline which was detected or which was observed, where the morning activities is a regular activity. The mid-morning, the afternoon plays a major role, where the women were given like more privacy in working out the spaces, that is available at the center point without the family distractions. The evening, which gives the interaction space for the intergenerational, that is the grandparents and the grandchildren activity, and also the studies where the parents can help them. And the night activity is the compulsory place where the common meals were taken at the adjacent space. Hope you could see the pictures that show. Where after the afternoon sessions, like the ladies private enough, and the evening sessions, the night is a compulsory place where everybody sits together and eat. So that is the one major thing that we miss nowadays. On getting into the psychological well-being, how these Muttrams acted in the before times, or still few families are still under practice. We came to know that the open to sky design, which gives the natural light and ventilation, which is more crucial for the mental health, where the Muttram induces the calmness, creativity, and the sense of connection to the nature, and the greenery and the obstructed airflow provide a sensory of enhancing the emotional equilibrium. And the Muttram also nurtures the emotional intimacy among family members, enabling shared moments that reinforce the psychological security. We had the practice of the elders narrating the stories. So that was
Stella,
the
you
crucial
have
thing that we
2
missed.
minutes left. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just put it up. The sensory richness of the Muttram is the natural light, aroma of the flowers, and the sound of the rustling leaves that is there. Nowadays, we are moving on to the therapy centers, meditational spaces, and the spaces to get all these natural things. Whereas in the previous days, it was available for the family at a smaller scale, where the members of the family, like at 10 to 12, can go around and get the natural light and the aroma and the natural sunlight that was prevailing over at that time. So not only the motion, the adjacent space also gives the interactive, which is more influenced, like the social interface between visitors, and the leisure of relaxation and casual conversation takes place at the thinner places, especially, and the cultural activities, that is the festivals and the ceremonies that can take place. Whereas the corridors of the Muttram spaces is like efficient movement, which gives a visual connectivity, continuity and connectivity with the outsiders and the place people who are getting into the houses and things. There is a one point which is called as the Kuditotam in the Muttrams, which was there followed previously, and now in the courtyards we take up this vegetation as one of the factor, which gives the biodiversity, temperature regulation, and the cultural practices. The plants and the herbs and sacred plants that we planted at the courtyards or at the Muttrams gives us the more healthy effectiveness also. This is the environmental relevance that we can take up Muttram into, especially on the rainwater harvesting, which was followed earlier itself, and the microclimatic benefits for the water and the plants, that is for the comfortable microclimate. Then the natural cooling techniques, like which allows the air to escape, the water to escape, and airflow optimization, and the materials energy, that is the traditional materials that is being used. So the picture shows how the rainwater is being drained takes place. So the three climatic zones where at the Tirupur it was a warm, humid climate where ventilation and heat reduction, dust management, and the energy efficiency were given more importance in terms of the quality of the fabrics and the looms that they store in a space, and the dust that is getting out because of the flooring typology that they use over there. Whereas in Srirangam, it was a tropical wet and dry climate where the rainwater management were given more importance, and the garden systems for the cooling effects, and the cross ventilation system with the type of privacy in them. The cultural significance, of course, it is the spiritual practice that they do over there. In Karakudi spaces, we can see the thermal comfort when a lot of people gather into a particular Muttram location. Also, still the sizes or the different courtyards that is being selected gives the thermal comfort for the gatherings, and also the water conservation that is used in the Muttram spaces. The Muttram spaces at Chettinad houses has the resilience, architectural resilience, like the terracotta, granite, and the materials, which gives us the durability in the humid conditions. Way forward, why would we do this study? Muttram is a place which is already there, and nobody is going to, if people want to get back to Muttram also, is it possible at the right scenario or at the right generation development? So, as Tamil Nadu is towards the phases of rapid urbanization, this Muttram becomes like the crucial part where the relic of heritage, or it is followed for the heritage part alone, where the functional of the blueprint, blueprint for the sustainable living is being forgotten kind. So, on taking that as the point, we can still see the modern context in the modern buildings where the essence is being taken, the Muttram essence is being taken. So the innovative concept of the vertical courtyards, the reversing of the traditional fairground relationship, offers a compelling solution for the dense urban environment where the concept of the Muttram can be taken into an account. So these vertical adaptations can retain Muttram's core benefit, that is the natural ventilation, communal gathering spaces, and the climatic harmony, while optimizing the land use in multi-storied buildings. So this
Kindly
approach
conclude.
allows the Muttram to, yeah, just a sec. So on taking, just just stuck. The connectivity between the urban future is possible, where we took the a little bit of like 3 case studies of the modern adaptations of can be rearranged at vertical sections, the standard openings. So this is the Kanchenjunga apartment where the privacy also is maintained. And this is one of the other thing where the communal gatherings were opted for the people with the Muttram as one of the concepts. So this is all left to the interventions of why Muttram can be followed. Yeah, it's just completed.
Thank you, Stella. Now we will start our question and answer round, and if we have any other questions from the chat box, I'll address them. But for now, the chairs can start the discussion. So, Dr. Louise Cooke and Dr. Vishakha Kawathekar, I request you to, to initiate the discussion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Professor Cooke, would you like to go first? I can.
Well, I'm just thinking back to you had questions from the very first paper,
Yes.
so I feel like we should come back to you, Vishakha.
Yeah. So I'll just go one by one per author, and maybe they can then go along while we do it. For the first paper, which was on the conservation conundrum of culturally significant by Shriya, I thought that there was a confusion. Rather, confusion means there were two concepts that were spoken, which was about detangling of history and historiography only based on literary sources was a little problematic, because where there's not explicit history written, we do go on memories, oral history, and the Purans to look for our sources of information. So I thought in that research, sources of information was very critical. And simplistic comparisons between frescoes of miniatures and the frescoes of Himachal Pradesh could be avoided, because there is this tendency of not understanding the context. Islam doesn't allow you to use human figures in religious places. Here, a lot of human figures are being used. There is a storytelling that is happening, which is also a cultural expression. So when there are such diverse cultural expressions, simplistically comparing them is little problematic for me. The third point I wanted to note in this presentation was there is a technical part of restoring a fresco, which goes into material combinations and things, and there is a chronological development of its meaning for culture and record. So both have different methodologies to look at it, and I think there a lot of work needs to be done, because if we are going into technical part of it, then we should get down to the scans that were then, the materials, how it is impacting, how rather than being only critical about religious practices, the solutions towards how we can continue with the religious practices as well as be very much aware about how to save the paintings should be there. One more aspect in that paper I thought was to be looked at is the tradition of renewing the paintings, because if that those are the religious practices and soot is so inevitable, then cleaning of the soot could also be a part of their religious practice, which is not looked into. So these were my little observations in the first paper. If we go to the second paper of Riddhi Shah, I think, Riddhi, what I can actually congratulate you is for the passion by which you are working on Rajkot. But with that, there were two things. You never spoke about community involvement in your entire paper. You didn't define the community, what community constitutes about. Is there a certain traditional method where they are organized, which can be used to a benefit? Is something that I think you, if you would have shared with us, it would have made more meaning. Your passion is coming through very, very prominently. So I think getting into these details is also important. And you again, we have come to the age in India in conservation where we are good issue identifiers, and I think now we have to go one step further to understand how do we convert the issues into challenges and start finding solutions. And I appreciate for you for looking at community involvement as one of the ways and methods, but the pulse of community involvement was not anywhere there in your presentation. What you presented, you might be knowing it, but it didn't come through the paper. The third paper, I think so, was on Stuti Gandhis, which was really on museums and reimagining heritage, decolonizing. Now, I think, Stuti, there is a little problem at which we look at decolonization or colonization, because we have to learn to be critical and not be one-sided again. So not everything that was done was bad, but then looking at it and in that perspective, we ourselves are not balanced in our viewpoints, and I think that is getting um, takes your research into a little biasness which you should have avoided. I do appreciate your entire way of looking at vernacular ethnographical evidences to come into the main stream of artifacts. But at the same time, the constraints in which museums function has to be understood, and maintenance is something that we have to look into. So material culture and the way it requires, the conditions in which we preserve them needs to be looked into. You did show examples of tribal museum and Pashupatinath coming into the painting, but I think again that's a very simplistic comparison. Tribal museums' strength is what were miniatures in real life were exploded to another scale, and then that brought the curiosity back to the people. Okay, this is there is knowledge and we need to have insight to that world. So they captured into that very beautifully. So I would have again in your paper looked for the thought processes as to how would you want this new generation with technology and with new understanding bring in those solutions into the museum where we experiment, we explore, and bring the crowd back to our museums. And I think you have a potential to do that, and I would surely love to see that happening with in your future as a very young professional getting, baked into the profession. If we look at Shivpriya's paper examining social behavior, I think I must congratulate this girl. It was a simple study, but it was very effective. The only thing I would have loved to know more was what is your survey questionnaire, and how many people have you interacted with? Because the solution the findings are more or less known but not proved. So it was good that you could bring out those findings from those questionnaires. And I do agree to the fact that social behavior of a common man is often either negated or not looked into when it comes to excavation. So I congratulate you to bring out that issue towards us. The last author, I am pretty sure because I was also going through your CVs, is a part of a larger doctoral research. And that's why I'm going to be more harsh and critical towards you, because I think from Sangam literature jumping to 18th century one example and 19th century one example is not doing justice. Muttram is a process in Indian architecture, is spread over the country, whether it is a religion or a state, its presence across the country is there. And breaking it into these three examples, which are not relatable in the contextual sense, because the socio-economic backgrounds are not matching. So there the research will always have a little problem in your findings. Muttrams is also multifunctional, the way you showed the timeline, but how Muttrams cannot be equated to open spaces within buildings in contemporary times. So I think there it is a huge problem, because when it came to contemporary examples, you only were showing the open spaces and not the courtyards. The courtyards, whether they are the front yards or within the enclosed or backyards, whatever courtyard we are talking about is a definite space, and that definiteness of that space was not dealt with in your paper. The other thing that I wanted to say was that there are dynamics of real estate value affordances in modern context, and just by saying ki there are so many benefits and should be incorporated alone will not help us. The third biggest problem with Muttrams trying to come into our contemporary is that our bylaws, the building bylaws, are not conducive unless you are a multi-millionaire having a huge plot of land. So with the kind of environment in which we are working, having a Muttram is a fantastic idea, but actually getting that kind of a space is a huge constraint. So I think along with your findings, there has to be a huge section on the dynamics which prevent you from making Muttrams in contemporary times. I think these were my observations, and I pass on. Means this is all I had to say. Professor Cooke may please
Great.
continue, and
Thank
all the presenters may please respond to it.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of pull out some of the themes. I thought the papers were all really, really interesting in relation to the theme of the conference, which is about the Charter 20 years on. And I pulled out some of those themes which I think we might want to come back to discuss. One around digital communities 20 years ago. That wasn't really a theme that we were thinking about with the Charter. So I think it would be nice to think about how that has changed and how the Charter could perhaps reflect that broader diversity of communities. I think across many of the papers, there's a real sort of gnarly tension between some of the things that we want to do in theory, some of the things that are happening in practice, but then actually how that is anchored within policy and decision making outside of our area of specialism within heritage, archaeology, heritage management, and architectural heritage. So actually, within the context of 20 years of really rapid development and change, how do those ideas of best practice within heritage get anchored within decision making? And something around how all of your critical thinking around those gnarly issues of communities and policy and decolonization, there is a remarkable set of really good sort of practices that we've just heard about. And I think one of the challenges when we look at things from a charter or just from a policy perspective is again that tension between the sort of best practice, what we want to do, and actually what that looks like in reality. So I think there is an opportunity from the papers we've heard already to sort of work some more and show this happening in practice. So I think they're all really, really interesting. But obviously, I don't know how we're doing for time. So have we got time for asking our speakers to respond to some of those points?
If you're willing to reduce the lunchtime, we're good because we're going to start the next session at 2:30. So up to you guys, Vishakha and Louise. Yeah.
I think
let's get some response. Let's continue it then.
Yes. I think it should be fair for every person to respond to whatever feedback they have got. They should.
Should I start? Okay, thank you, both of you. Thanks for your critical analysis. And I want to say that, yes, my paper did come across as overly critical. It's because this is all we discussed, especially with the Central Vista coming up and the plan to, to move the National Museum to a new place, and everyone's been very critical about it. And that's been the tone majorly. But if I look at the National Museum, the way it exists right now, it's one of my favorite places to visit. And I know it's not all bad. In fact, in 1960, when Prime Minister Pandit Nehru had invited Grace Morley to be the director of the museum, this museum was a benchmark for a lot of new museums that were coming up in developing countries. And I feel it's just that if the government is so ambitious with a new museum that will have 950 rooms, I mean, what do you do with 950 rooms? And in a large area, it would cover a large area. So I think this is a good opportunity to think about the exhibits, the way they have been displayed right now, the way they have been. It is the responsibility of the curators to tell us why they have been exhibited the way they have been. And I know you can't keep changing permanent exhibitions. They are permanent for a reason. But it would be nice to be more critical through other ways so that you don't have to move around your displays a lot. So one way could be, for maybe to have some private walks where you are analyzing the labels more critically or empowering the visitors, more, having something, some audio walks where you are not going through the galleries the way you are supposed to on level 1, 2, 3, like that. And if you do have a museum with 950 rooms, I think that would become essential at some point. But yeah, I don't know how practical all of what I said would be. It's an ideal situation, but I did feel that it's important to talk about it.
Sure. But the decolonization that it meant was also about it being a very strong colonial history carrying buildings becoming a national identity by converting into a Yuge Yugin Bharat Museum. So the whole thought of decolonization is embedded into it. Okay. Anyways, we'll speak more about it, Stuti. It's good to hear you.
All right, continuing from that train of thought now, because my paper, I think a lot of things in the presentation are not the things that are in the paper. So when you talk about how that bit is missing and this bit is missing, a lot of that went into the paper, but because we were only allowed 10 minutes of time, and I didn't want to sort of eat into everybody else's time, I wanted to keep it short and sweet and also understandable to people. Regarding comparison with the Mughal things, now I do realize there's a lot of difference. As a Pahadi person myself, I can tell you very safely that there's a lot of difference between the way Mughals perceive something. What I was trying to say is this is where the influence comes from. Not that essentially the influence remains the same or there are no naturalistic elements or any elements that have come from the indigenous culture, also with the identity. Now, when you look at Islamic motifs, for example, like Professor Kawathekar just said, you do not really have human depictions in Islam because it is haram to depict humans. Only God can create humans. And it's only God that can create perfection. Hinduism doesn't stand by the same motifs, which is humans. God himself is sort of identified as human or anthropomorphic in Hinduism in a lot of his representations or her representations, depending on the gender of the deity. So when you have those things, of course, there are differences that go beyond. But if you had to simplify it for the purpose of a presentation, again, the paper does not delve into it. The paper talks a lot about what's wrong with the frescoes, what's going on, and what are the ground realities. So when you sit down and formulate a conservation strategy on paper on how these sites must be protected, and when you look at what the situation is on site, you cannot bar all the cultural practices. You cannot stop people from worshipping a certain way because that's eating into their religious identity and telling them what not to do. So, as you noticed, the paper's title is Conservation Conundrum, which means how does one, as an archaeologist, as a conservator, or as a person on the inside, start with working on this? And what my paper tries to do is just identify the basic problems of conservation at the moment because of all these practices going on. As of now, the site is not recognized by ASI. It's not even recognized as a historic site by the locals. It's looked at as an active temple, and a half of it has been painted over, as you could see from the very first image. So a lot of the paintings are already lost. And I spoke to the local community. They do have plans. Even the temple board has plans to paint over the whole frescoes, which would be detrimental because it is a very particular part of Himachal Pradesh. If you look into the existing historiography, which is very limited, but there is significant historiography there by people like Eberhard Fischer and B.N. Goswami, for example, when you look at what has been done, there's very little that's known about Sirmaur school of miniature art, whether that's on paper or that's on frescoes. There are not a lot of recorded samples. Also, there's a tendency to use the umbrella term Pahadi miniatures. If you walk through the National Museum in Delhi, a lot of things are just labeled Pahadi miniatures without saying whether it's Kangra School, Guler, Basholi. There are above 15 plus individual schools emerging in the Punjab Hill states. And very little critical study has been done in terms of how do they differ from each other in style, how do they differ from each other in terms of the material of make, what kind of pigments or dyes they're using. All of that needs to be done. And on top of that, we have a fresco here or a fresco site here because all Pahadi miniature that is translated into paper later on in the 18th and the 19th century emerges from frescoes that were made in the 17th century in these temples. Now, if you lose the temple sites, you're losing an important step towards understanding those paintings on gouache on paper. And to do that, the first thing to do would be document these sites and talk about them on platforms such as these, where we have people from conservation background, we have a body like INTACH that engages in this. And there is a necessity here to document, talk about the problems, and then figure out what would be the ground plan for conservation, so to speak, which at the moment, in case of Himachal Pradesh, particularly with the site in question, is something that we're lacking. A few years ago, there was a similar paper that I'd written with the IGNCA that was published in Kalakalp, where I talk about similar temples, but from different parts of Himachal Pradesh, of course, different school of art than this one. And again, we had a conservation conundrum because ASI only recognizes one such site. In the name of conservation and recreation of paintings, so recreating that, employing the local artists, they've used watercolor on Bhiti architecture and acrylic on Bhiti architecture, which has eaten into not just the pigment inside, but also the mortar. And we've lost the complete wall. So the whole thing's collapsed now because chemical paints were used instead of organic ones. Now, that's something that ASI has done on a protected site on their watch, which shows there's a huge gap between how archaeologists are consulted when it's a heritage site and how conservators are consulted when it's an archaeological site. So it is that bridge that we need to sort of put together between conservators, between archaeologists, between people like me who document a site and talk about condition assessment, and between people such as you who take active decisions in terms of how the conservation should take place. And sadly, in India, that is again at loggers' heads. You have certain sites that are only looked at by archaeologists. There are certain sites that are only looked at